up, witches? I'm Allie, the Bronx Witch, and if you're new to my channel, I make videos about Wicca, the religion, witchcraft, the practice, and I do weekly tarot readings. This is the next video in my Celebrating the Sabbats series, and this video we are talking about the Sabbat of Ostara. Ostara, aka the spring or vernal equinox, is the official start of spring in the Gregorian calendar, the calendar that we are all familiar with today. In the pagan wheel of the year, the start of spring was back in February when we celebrated Imbolc. And if you haven't taken a look at that video, I will link it up above. The spring equinox is the point at which the sun hits its zenith and is situated directly above the equator. So at the exact moment of the spring equinox, we have an equal amount of daylight and nighttime hours. And immediately following the equinox, the amount of daylight hours that we receive in the northern hemisphere begins to increase. The southern hemisphere, in the reverse, celebrates the autumn equinox, and they experience an increasing decrease of sunlight hours. In the northern hemisphere, Ostara this year falls on Thursday, March 19th at 11:49 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I first want to mention that when it comes to the pagan wheel of the year, the 8 Sabbats that many pagans and most Wiccans celebrate, there was no particular group of pagans in history that celebrated exactly these 8 Sabbats. The 8 Sabbats that we are familiar with in modern day paganism was established by Gerald Gardner when he was creating the basic tenets and outline of the Wiccan religion. He pulled celebrations, folklore, and holidays from various pagan traditions to make a sort of consistent and organized calendar that had 8 Sabbats spaced approximately 6 weeks apart. Out of all 8 of the Sabbats, Ostara is the most made up, in the sense that there is very little evidence that the pagans of old specifically celebrated this type of holiday. Remember, spring for our pagan ancestors was Imbolc, around the beginning of February. So they didn't necessarily associate this time of year as the start of spring or something that was worthy of a particular holiday or festival or celebration. And the actual holiday Ostara, which is named after the German fertility goddess Ostara, seems to actually have been something that was celebrated in April. Further, the earth goddess Ostara, and I hope I'm saying that right, I'm probably not, but it's spelled Eostre, and you've probably seen that word. She is a Celtic goddess who apparently we get the name Ostara from, and who is supposed to be the main goddess associated with this holiday. But there's very little evidence to support that this goddess even really existed, and if she did existed, there's very little evidence to suggest like what role she played and how she would have been celebrated. So even though the Sabbat of Ostara is basically a collection of traditions and folklore from various holidays and practices that would have fallen around this time, it is still the case that the spring equinox was very important to people all over the ancient world, because it did mark an important transition in the sun's cycle through our year. Evidence of the importance of the spring equinox in the ancient world can be found all over the world. There are tons of stone monuments that were erected in ancient times that correspond physically exactly with where the sun falls during the spring equinox in those locations. So places like the Fern Acre Stone Circle in Cornwall, the Angkor Wat in Cambodia, and the Spout Run Paleo Indian site in Clark County, Virginia, are all examples of stone monuments or structures that were erected by ancient man to line up precisely with where the sun would fall during the spring equinox in those locations. So we know that the spring equinox, like pretty much all the other equinoxes and solstices were very important to ancient man. Aside from structures that mark the physical location of the sun during the spring equinox, we also have a ton of myths and folklore about deities and demigods in the ancient world that reflect the themes of the spring season. Pretty much all of these celebrations and stories center around the themes of rejuvenation, rebirth, fertility, animal birth, and youthful vitality. The most prominent, of course, would be the Judeo-Christian holidays of Passover and Easter. Easter is a holiday that marks the time at which Christians believe Jesus Christ rose from the dead after 3 days of entombment. Passover is a celebration that marks the freeing of the Jewish people from slavery under the Egyptians. Aside from Passover and Easter, we have celebrations in ancient Greece that would have centered around Dionysus, who was the god of plant life, in particular grapes. There would be celebrations for Persephone, who was returning to the earth after half a year in the underworld. There were celebrations celebrating the Norse goddess Freya, who is the goddess of fertility and sex, life and death. Throughout the ancient world, Sybil was a prominent earth mother goddess, and she would have been celebrated at this time for her relationship to fertility, rebirth, and regeneration. The Celtic god Cernunnos, who's considered the Earth Father, would have been celebrated for his role in mating with the Earth Mother to bring about the new abundance of green life and animal life on the planet. So there are plenty of stories of celebrations and festivals that would have been held around this time, all celebrating the themes of spring. In modern times, Ostara and the spring season in general are celebrated as a time of regeneration and new beginnings. So I like to think of the progression of the beginning of the Gregorian calendar as January being the time to let go of past influences and anything negative or unhelpful that we're carrying with us from the previous year. February is a great time for organizing and planning and setting our sights on the year to come. And March is the time to actually put those things in action and get started on anything new that we want to tackle in this year. It's common for people to do spring cleanings, home blessing, plant new seeds, or get started on new projects or new relationships at this time. For pagans, Ostara is typically a time to focus in on divine masculine energy as it's represented by the sun, and to hold rituals that honor the earth. The lamb historically is also an important symbol because it not only represents Aries, which is the zodiac that the sun will enter around the same time as the equinox, but historically, the lamb has been associated with ritual sacrifice to the gods and goddesses and a representation of the sacrifice made by Jesus Christ. Most modern pagans, however, particularly Wiccans, don't engage in any type of animal ritual sacrifice. So for those Wiccans and pagans who eat meat, they might decide to serve a lamb dish at an Ostara ritual or feast. So let's talk about some of Ostara's correspondences so that you can think of perhaps incorporating some of these things into any of the rituals or celebrations that you will have to mark this Sabbat. So the colors of the season include green, light blue, silver, white, pink, and yellow. And useful herbs to work with at this time include High John the Conqueror and Irish moss. With the theme of spring being all about the earth's rebirth, pretty much any flowers are great to work with, but you might want to focus in on flowers like daffodil, jasmine, orange blossom, primrose, rose, tulips, and violets. Anything really colorful. Crystals that are useful to work with at this time include agate, aquamarine, and bloodstone. And if you would like to incorporate animal energy into your workings, things like bees, boars, rams, robins, hedgehogs, and baby chicks are great to work with. If you are making an Ostara feast, you might want to incorporate foods like asparagus, dill, honey, lamb, lettuce, and radishes. And if you're crafting, symbols like baskets, eggs, the hair, like, hoppity hoppity hair, and seeds are all wonderful options to work with. Aside from cooking a feast, or engaging in your sort of typical springtime crafts like decorating eggs, painting with bright colors, working with flowers, you might also want to do some types of spell work that has to do with getting started on a new project. So road opener spells would be really useful at this time to help clear the path for any new projects or endeavors that you would like to work on. Fertility spells would be a great idea if you or someone you know are trying to get pregnant, or if you or someone you know is pregnant. Casting spells for the health and safety of the mother and baby would also be great spells to work at this time. Prosperity spells would also get an extra jolt of energy from the air of rejuvenation and new birth. And of course, there are plenty of deities that you could work with. Some of that I mentioned earlier in the video that relate to the themes of fertility and new birth, which would be really helpful if you work with deities in your spell work. And if you're looking for more information on ritual ideas, recipes, crafts, special prayers or invocations that you can incorporate into your Ostara celebrations, I definitely recommend the Llewellyn Sabbat Essentials series. They have a book of rituals, recipes, and lore for each of the 8 Sabbats in the pagan wheel of the year. And they are a great starting point if you are just beginning to come up with ideas for how you want to celebrate your Sabbats. I'll include a link to the Ostara book in this series down below. So witches, I really hope you found this video helpful and that you liked it. If you did, please let me know by clicking on the thumbs up. If you have any comments or questions, just leave them for me down below. And of course, subscribe. Click on the bell button so you're notified every time a new video comes out. You can follow me on Instagram at BronxWitch, and I will see you in the next video. Blessed be.